The steady beep of a heart monitor pulled me from darkness. My eyelids felt heavy, like they were weighted down with sand. When I finally managed to open them, harsh fluorescent light assaulted my vision, making me wince. Everything appeared too bright, too sharp, from the sterile white ceiling to the mint green privacy curtain partially drawn around my bed. "She's awake!" a female voice called out. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. A woman in blue scrubs with chestnut curls approached my bedside and adjusted something on the monitor beside me. "Take it easy, honey. You've been unconscious for a few days," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Nurse Zara. Let me get you some water." As she held a cup to my lips, I took small, painful sips. My mind swam with confusion. Hospital. I was in a hospital. But why? What happened? I managed to croak. "You were in a car accident," Nurse Zara explained. "On Thursday evening at Oakwood intersection. Do you remember any of it?" I searched my memory but found only fragments. Headlights, a horn blaring, the sickening crunch of metal. The rest was a void. "Not really," I whispered. "That's normal with trauma. I'll let Dr. Patel know you're awake. She'll want to examine you." As Nurse Zara turned to leave, I heard her voice again, though her lips weren't moving. "If Mark thinks I don't know about Sarah from accounting, he's delusional. 5 years together and he throws it away like that." I blinked in confusion. Had she spoken aloud? No, her back was to me now, and the voice had a different quality, more intimate, unfiltered. Before I could process this, a doctor entered, a woman with black hair in a neat bun and intelligent eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. "Miss Clark, I'm Dr. Patel. You're at Metropolitan General. You were brought in after a severe collision 3 days ago." Her voice was clear, professional. "Do you know what day it is?" I tried to think, but the dates were slippery in my mind. "If the accident was Thursday, Sunday?" "That's right," Dr. Patel nodded, shining a penlight in my eyes. "You're doing well, considering. Your vital signs are stabilizing nicely." But as she examined me, I heard another voice overlay her spoken words. "The anoxic episode concerns me. 3 minutes without oxygen to the brain. We need to watch for cognitive deficits. The family would have grounds for malpractice if we miss anything." I froze. The voice was unmistakably hers, yet her lips hadn't formed those words. "3 minutes?" I asked, my voice shaking. Dr. Patel paused, her expression shifting. "Yes," I was about to explain. "You were clinically dead for approximately 3 minutes before we were able to resuscitate you. Your heart stopped due to the trauma and blood loss." The room seemed to tilt around me. Dead. I had been dead. "It's not uncommon in severe accidents," she continued, her tone gentler now. "You're young and otherwise healthy, which worked in your favor, but we'll need to monitor you closely for any after effects. Please don't let her be another one with complications. The Westlake lawsuit nearly bankrupted the hospital last year." I stared at her, horrified. Was I imagining these voices? Hallucinating? Is my brain damaged?" I asked. Dr. Patel's expression softened. "Your initial scans show no significant damage, but we're being cautious. Some confusion and disorientation are normal. We'll run more tests today." As the day progressed, the strange phenomenon continued. A technician taking blood thought about his lunch while asking about my pain level. An orderly complained mentally about his shift while cheerfully helping me sit up. Colors seemed more vivid than I remembered. The red of a biohazard container almost pulsating with intensity. Sounds were sharper, too. I could hear conversations at the nurse's station down the hall with unsettling clarity. By evening, I was terrified I was losing my mind. Then a pattern emerged. The voices I heard matched the people around me, their thoughts, not random hallucinations. I was somehow hearing what they were thinking. The realization didn't comfort me. If anything, it frightened me more. On the second day of consciousness, Nurse Zara wheeled me to physical therapy. "You're making remarkable progress," she said, checking my pulse. "Dr. Patel is impressed. Poor thing looks terrified. Post-accident trauma, probably. At least she has people visiting. Mark hasn't called in 3 days. I'd learned to hide my reactions to these mental intrusions, but each one felt like a violation, both for me and the person whose private thoughts I was intercepting." The physical therapy room was a large space with exercise equipment and treatment tables. As Nurse Zara helped me from the wheelchair to a padded bench, a man approached us. Tall, with straight black hair and rectangular glasses, he moved with deliberate calmness. "This is Julian Chen," Nurse Zara introduced him. "He's a psychology graduate student who volunteers here. He'll be assisting with your session today. Nice to meet you, Sienna, Julian said with a slight smile. How are you feeling today? I braced myself for the inevitable mental commentary that would contradict his polite question, but nothing came, just silence. For the first time since waking up, I encountered someone whose thoughts I couldn't hear. I've been better, I answered, studying him curiously. Throughout the therapy session, Julian guided me through simple exercises to test my motor skills and coordination. He was patient and attentive, but his mind remained a complete blank to me, an inexplicable void amid the constant noise I'd been experiencing. You're doing great, he said as he helped me stretch my arm, stiff from days in bed. Take it slow. I found myself relaxing in his presence, grateful for the respite from the mental chatter. When the session ended, I was reluctant to return to my room. Will you be here tomorrow? I asked him. I volunteer Tuesdays and Thursdays, he replied, but I can check in on you if you'd like. I nodded, perhaps too eagerly. Please. That afternoon, I had visitors. Ethan, my ex-fiancé, arrived first. We'd broken up 2 months before my accident, but seeing his familiar face, sandy blonde hair and blue eyes that once made my heart race, still stirred complicated emotions. Sienna, he said, laying a small bouquet on my bedside table. God, you had us all worried. His expression showed concern, but immediately I heard. This is so awkward. Should have sent flowers instead of coming. At least I can tell everyone I visited. Would have felt like such a dick if she'd died. I stared at him, the betrayal of his thoughts stinging more than our breakup had. We'd been together 3 years, engaged for 1, before he'd suddenly decided he needed space. Now I wondered what thoughts he'd hidden then. Thanks for coming, I said flatly. Of course. What kind of person would I be if I didn't? He sat in the visitor's chair, not quite meeting my eyes. How are you feeling? Please don't make this a long visit. I told Claire I'd pick her up at 4. Claire, my best friend since college. The mention of her and his thoughts made my stomach tighten with sudden suspicion. I'm alive, I answered, which apparently wasn't a guarantee. Yeah, they told us it was touch and go. He fidgeted with his watch. Really scary. Thank God she made it. The guilt would have been unbearable. Not grief, not loss, just guilt. Our conversation limped along for 20 painful minutes before he glanced at his watch and stood. I should let you rest. Claire mentioned she might stop by later. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. True to his word, Claire arrived an hour later, her blonde bob perfect as always, bearing a gift bag and forced cheerfulness. Sienna, she exclaimed, leaning in for a careful hug. You look so much better than I expected. God, she looks awful. Those hospital gowns are beyond depressing. It's good to see you, I lied. As Claire chattered about the art department and mutual friends, her thoughts revealed a different narrative. I should have brought magazines. This is so boring. Ethan's waiting and we have dinner reservations at 7. Ethan and Claire. The pieces clicked into place. His sudden need for space, her frequent cancellations of our plans. While I'd been devastated by our breakup, they'd been seeing each other behind my back. And Professor Langdon asked about you, Claire was saying. Everyone's pulling for you. Hopefully she'll be back soon. Her absence makes my chances for the Harrington Scholarship much better. I closed my eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the disparity between her words and thoughts. My best friend, my ex-fiancé, both fake, both betrayers. I'm pretty tired, I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. Oh, of course. Claire looked relieved. I'll come back when you're feeling stronger, thank God. Now I won't have to cancel the dinner reservation. After she left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a strange calm settling over me. At least now I knew I wasn't hallucinating. These hidden thoughts confirmed what had seemed impossible. Somehow I was hearing people's unspoken thoughts. On the morning of my 4th day in the hospital, Dr. Patel informed me I would be discharged. Your recovery has been remarkable, she said, reviewing my chart. But I want you to take it easy. No driving for at least 2 weeks, limited physical exertion, and follow up with your primary physician next week. Maybe we dodged the bullet on cognitive issues. Still, her reported sensory sensitivity bears watching. What about the sensitivity I mentioned? I asked cautiously. I told her about the vivid colors and heightened sounds, but not about hearing thoughts. That seemed like a one-way ticket to the psychiatric ward. Post-traumatic symptoms can include sensory changes, she explained. They typically resolve within a few weeks. If they persist or worsen, we'll investigate further. She handed me discharge papers and prescriptions for pain management. Do you have someone to take you home? I hesitated. My parents lived 3 states away. Ethan and Claire were obviously not options. My other friends were more acquaintances, really. Fellow art students I wasn't close enough with to ask for help. I can call a cab, I said. That won't be necessary. I turned to see Julian standing in the doorway, a wheelchair in front of him. I'm here to escort you out, he said with a small smile. Hospital policy. Relief washed over me, not just for the ride, but for his blessedly silent mind. After changing into clothes my neighbor had dropped off, I carefully lowered myself into the wheelchair. Julian pushed me through the hospital corridors, past nurses and patients whose thoughts bombarded me from every direction. Late for lunch. Hope the babysitter doesn't charge extra. That test result can't be right. Where did I park again? The mental noise grew as we passed through the busy lobby, becoming almost unbearable. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to block it out. Headache? Julian asked, pausing. Something like that, I managed. He studied me with unusual intensity. It can be overwhelming, can't it? All the input. For a moment I wondered if he somehow knew what I was experiencing, but that was impossible. Outside, the late September air felt crisp against my skin. Julian helped me into his modest sedan and stowed my small bag in the back. Where to? He asked, sliding into the driver's seat. Artisan Apartments on Madison Street, Building C. As we pulled away from Metropolitan General, I watched the hospital recede in the side mirror. Whatever had happened to me during those 3 minutes of death had changed me fundamentally. The world was louder, brighter, and filled with unwanted secrets. Only Julian provided silence in the storm. Thank you, I said quietly, for the ride and everything. He glanced at me briefly before returning his eyes to the road. You're welcome, Sienna. I leaned back against the headrest, exhausted but resolute. I needed to understand what had happened to me, this strange ability that felt more like a curse, and somehow I suspected Julian Chen was key to the mystery. His mental silence couldn't be coincidence. Nothing about this was coincidence. As we drove through the city streets toward my apartment, I made a decision. I would figure out what had happened to me during those lost 3 minutes, and I would discover why, out of everyone I'd encountered, Julian's mind was the only one closed to me. The crisp October air stung my face as I stood at the entrance to Westlake University's Fine Arts Building. Students streamed past me, their thoughts hitting me in waves. God, I'm so hungover. Professor Lin is going to kill me if I'm late again. I should have eaten breakfast. That assignment is due today? I adjusted my scarf higher around my neck, as if it might somehow block the mental noise. The 2 weeks since Julian had driven me home from the hospital had been an exercise in isolation. I'd spent most days in my apartment, venturing out only for necessities, overwhelmed each time by the cacophony of thoughts from neighbors, cashiers, and random pedestrians. But I couldn't hide forever. My medical leave was up, and the fall semester waited for no one, not even someone who'd experienced clinical death. I took a deep breath and pushed through the double doors. The familiar smell of oil paint, clay, and fixative should have felt like coming home. Instead, the art studio that had once been my sanctuary now felt like walking into a storm of mental static. 23 students, all thinking at once. Emma's new piece is garbage. Will Ryan notice if I wear this top? Shit, I forgot to prime my canvas. I slipped into my usual spot by the windows, trying to appear normal while my head throbbed with others' thoughts. Several classmates approached with sympathetic smiles, asking about my accident, offering help with notes I'd missed. Sienna! Welcome back! Professor Langdon's booming voice cut through the chatter as he entered, his tweed jacket worn at the elbows and his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed. He strode over, placing a paternal hand on my shoulder. We've missed your presence in class. What timing? Just when her absence might have given the Withers grant to someone more deserving. Of course she returns the week of the announcement. I stiffened under his touch. Professor Langdon had been my mentor for 3 years. I'd trusted his guidance, believed in his support. Now I heard what lurked beneath. Thank you, Professor, I managed. It's good to be back. Your submission for the Withers grant was exemplary, he continued, smiling. The committee meets Friday, but between us, I think you have an excellent chance. That canvas showed more raw talent than anything I've produced in a decade. Youth is wasted on amateurs who don't understand the sacrifices real artists make. I nodded numbly, fighting to keep my expression neutral. As he moved away to begin the class, I sat frozen, processing this betrayal. The man who had championed my work, who had seemed so genuinely invested in my growth as an artist, secretly resented me. For 2 hours, I went through the motions of painting, barely aware of my brushstrokes, while surrounded by the unfiltered thoughts of my peers. Some were harmless, concerns about technique or weekend plans. Others cut deeper, judgments about my work, speculations about my accident, pity for my zombie-like appearance. When class ended, I fled to the campus cafe, seeking caffeine and a moment to breathe. The crowd was thinner there, the mental noise slightly more manageable. I ordered a large coffee and found a corner table, pressing my back against the wall. That's when I saw them. Ethan and Claire at a table near the window, his arm casually draped over her chair. My ex-fiancé and my best friend, looking like they belonged together. I'd suspected from their thoughts at the hospital, but seeing them confirmed everything. The intimacy in their body language spoke of a relationship far beyond recent development. Just breathe. Don't let them see you. Too late. Claire spotted me, nudging Ethan. They exchanged looks before approaching my table with plastered smiles. "Sienna!" Claire exclaimed. "I didn't know you were back on campus." Her blonde bob bounced as she leaned in for an awkward half-hug. "God, this is awkward. She looks terrible. Maybe we should have waited longer to go public." "Just started today," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "How are you feeling? Like I should care more, but honestly, I'm just glad she's not my problem anymore." "Better," I lied, still adjusting. "We were going to call you," Claire said, fiddling with her necklace, the silver pendant I'd given her for her birthday last year. "To, tell you about us." "Sure we were, after we'd already moved in together." "It just happened," Ethan added, not meeting my eyes. "After you and I broke up. We were sleeping together for months before I ended it with her." God, she was so clueless. Remember when I told her I was working late, but was actually at Claire's? My coffee cup cracked between my fingers, hot liquid spilling onto the table. They both jumped back. "Sorry," I muttered, grabbing napkins, still a little clumsy since the accident. "Let me help," Claire offered, reaching for more napkins. "Thankfully, that gives us an excuse to leave. We're meeting the landlord at 4 to sign the lease." "I've got it," I said. "Don't let me keep you from your plans." They exchanged another glance. "If you need anything," Ethan started. "I'll call someone else," I finished. After they walked away, whispering to each other, I sat amid the coffee-soaked napkins, my hands trembling. Months. They'd been together for months while I was still wearing his ring, while Claire was helping me plan my wedding, and they had laughed at me, mocked my trust, called me clueless. I grabbed my bag and left, walking blindly across campus until I found myself at the small pond behind the music building. I sat on a bench, watching ducks glide across the water, and let the tears come. Not for Ethan. I realized I'd begun mourning that relationship before the accident. Not even for Claire, though her betrayal cut deeper. I cried for my own blindness, for the person who had trusted so easily, that Sienna had died in the crash and would never return. By the time I reached my apartment off Madison Street, anger had replaced the hurt. I paced the small living room, replaying the mental voices I'd heard. Professor Langdon's resentment, Ethan and Claire's deception, the casual cruelty in their thoughts. For days, I barely left my apartment. I called in sick to my campus job, ordered delivery food, and let my phone go to voicemail. The silence was a relief, but the anger festered. They had stolen from me my trust, my peace, my sense of belonging, and they'd gotten away with it because I couldn't see the truth. But now I could. A plan began forming. If my newfound ability was a curse, perhaps it could also be a weapon, not for random destruction, but for precise justice. The following Monday, I returned to campus with purpose. In Professor Langdon's class, I approached him after the lecture. "Professor, I've been thinking about that article you published in Art Quarterly last year," I said casually. "The one about symbolic representation in postmodern urban landscapes." His eyes lit up. "One of my better contributions, I think. It reminded me of Ivan Karinsky's thesis from 2015. The parallelism is striking." His face froze, color draining slowly. "She can't know. No one reads doctoral theses from Estonian universities." I was careful. "I may have been influenced by similar sources," he stammered. "Perhaps," I smiled. By the way, I mentioned it to Professor Walsh when she was discussing academic integrity yesterday. She seemed quite interested. I walked away, leaving him pale and panicked. Professor Walsh, as department chair, took plagiarism seriously. I hadn't explicitly accused him. I'd simply connected dots only someone with access to his thoughts could have aligned. That afternoon, I spotted Claire in the library. I sat beside her, ignoring her startled expression. "Working on your exhibition piece?" I asked pleasantly. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "The one inspired by industrial reclamation. The one I copied from that artist I found online. No one will ever know. Her work isn't famous here." "It reminds me of Maya Lupton's series," I said, watching her carefully. "The one featured in that San Francisco gallery last year." Claire's pencil snapped in her hand. I don't know who that is." "Really? I just emailed you a link to her portfolio. Such similar concepts. I also copied the gallery curator, since they might be interested in the conversation between your works." I left her frantically checking her email. I had indeed sent the comparison, from an anonymous account that couldn't be traced back to me. For Ethan, I took a different approach. While researching his background for wedding invitations months ago, I discovered discrepancies in his financial aid applications. He'd claimed independent status, while his parents still claimed him as a dependent, a fraud worth thousands of dollars. From a campus computer, I sent an anonymous tip to the financial aid office with dates, document numbers, and just enough specifics to trigger an investigation. Each act of revenge provided momentary satisfaction. I wasn't destroying their lives. I was simply revealing truths they had carefully hidden. If they suffered consequences, it was for their actions, not my intervention. Yet the satisfaction faded quickly, leaving hollowness in its wake. I wasn't sleeping well. When I did, I dreamed of the accident, of darkness, and beeping monitors and voices I couldn't quite place. One afternoon, while hiding in a back corner of the university library, I spotted Julian among the stacks. He was focused on a large volume about neurological responses to trauma, his rectangular glasses sliding slightly down his nose as he read. I hadn't seen him since he'd driven me home from the hospital, though I'd thought about him often, about his mental silence, about how he'd looked at me with curiosity, but not pity. As if sensing my presence, he looked up. Our eyes met across the quiet space. He didn't smile or wave, just closed his book and made his way to my table. "Hello, Sienna," he said, his voice low and calm. "Julian." He sat across from me, not asking how I was or why I'd been avoiding campus spots where we might encounter each other. Instead, he placed a worn paperback on the table. "I thought you might like this. It's about an artist who loses her vision, but finds a different way to create." I looked at the book, then at him. "Why would you think I'd be interested in that?" "Because you're experiencing the world differently now," he said simply, "and you're an artist." I stared at him, searching for hidden meanings or judgments, but his expression remained open and unreadable, and his mind, still silent. "Thank you," I finally said, taking the book. We sat in companionable silence while I returned to my reading, and he to his. When the library closed, he walked me to the bus stop without comment or question about my destination, just presence, simple companionship. Over the next week, Julian appeared in my orbit several times, at the campus coffee shop where I hid in the corner booth, at the small art supply store where I replenished my paints, once even at the grocery store near my apartment. Each time, he acknowledged me with quiet respect, sometimes joining me, sometimes just nodding from a distance. He never asked about my withdrawal from others or my strange reactions when someone's thoughts particularly disturbed me. He simply existed alongside me, a silent harbor in the storm of voices. One evening as I was leaving the studio late, I found him waiting outside, leaning against a maple tree. "I have a proposition," he said when I approached. "What kind of proposition?" I asked, wary of the word. "Dinner, Riverstone Cafe, tomorrow at 7. He pushed his glasses up. No expectations, just food and conversation. I studied him in the amber glow of the campus lights. In 2 weeks of casual encounters, Julian had offered more genuine support than Ethan or Claire had in years, and without saying much at all. "Why?" I asked. "Because you look like you could use a friend," he said. "And their blackberry cobbler is excellent." A small laugh escaped me, the first in what felt like forever. Is that your professional assessment as a psychology student? No. His expression softened slightly. That's my personal assessment as someone who recognizes isolation when he sees it. I should have said no. I was in no state for new connections, still raw from discovering the falseness of old ones. But Julian's mental silence offered what nothing else could: peace from the constant intrusion of others' thoughts. Okay, I said, but I'm ordering the most expensive thing on the menu. I would expect nothing less. The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. As I walked home that night, a strange lightness competed with the anger I'd been nurturing. The calculated revenge against my betrayers had provided momentary satisfaction, but no real peace. Julian's simple offer of dinner, however, sparked something I hadn't felt since before the accident: curiosity, interest in something beyond my pain. I still didn't know why I couldn't hear his thoughts when everyone else's blared like sirens. I didn't know what he wanted from me, if anything. But for the first time in 2 weeks, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. The dim lighting of Riverstone Cafe cast a warm glow over the rustic wooden table between us. Julian sat across from me, his rectangular glasses catching the light as he studied the menu. True to my word, I'd ordered the most expensive entree, pan-seared scallops with truffle risotto, though my appetite had been unreliable since the accident. "So how's the art coming along?" Julian asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. "Slower than before," I admitted. "Everything feels different now. The colors, textures, my perspective." Julian nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Trauma changes how we perceive the world. It's normal." Around us, the thoughts of other diners swirled like background noise: complaints about work, anxiety about first dates, a woman debating whether to order dessert despite her diet. But at our table, there was relative quiet. Julian remained the anomaly, his mind a blank canvas to my unwanted new sense. As promised, the blackberry cobbler was excellent. Julian insisted I try it, watching with satisfaction as I closed my eyes at the first bite. "Told you," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. That dinner marked the beginning of something I hadn't expected. In the days that followed, Julian and I fell into an easy pattern. He never questioned why I flinched when entering crowded spaces, or why I sometimes answered questions no one had asked aloud. He simply offered alternatives: quieter cafes, less traveled paths through campus, a sanctuary from the mental noise that had become my constant companion. His apartment above Philip's bookstore became my favorite retreat. The modest 2-bedroom space smelled pleasantly of old books and tea, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves creating a cocoon of knowledge. The spare bedroom had been converted into an office, filled with psychology and medical texts. The living room featured a worn leather couch positioned perfectly by the bay window overlooking Madison Street. "Make yourself at home," Julian told me the first time he invited me up, about a week after our dinner. "I need to finish some research notes. Feel free to browse the shelves." I'd wandered his collection, fingers trailing along spines on subjects ranging from neuroscience to philosophy to art history. When he emerged from his office an hour later, he found me curled in the window seat with a volume of Romantic-era artwork. "Found something interesting?" he asked, making tea in the small kitchen without turning on the overhead light, as if he knew bright lights sometimes triggered my headaches. I nodded. "I've always loved Turner's work, the way he captures light. It's like he could see things others couldn't." Julian placed a steaming mug of jasmine tea beside me, my favorite, though I didn't remember telling him that. "Maybe he could," Julian replied thoughtfully. Within a month, we had established our own little world. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we met at the Lakeview Cafe tucked behind the Science Building. With its limited seating and location off the beaten path, it rarely hosted more than 3 or 4 customers at a time. The mental static was manageable there. Weekends often found us at Evergreen Park, sitting beneath a sprawling oak tree far from the popular playground and picnic areas. Julian would read psychology journals while I sketched in my pad, gradually returning to the art that had once defined me. "You never ask," I said one Saturday in late October, as golden leaves spiraled down around us. "Ask what?" Julian looked up from his reading. "Why I avoid crowds, why I sometimes respond to things no one said, why I know things I shouldn't know." Julian closed his journal. "Would you want me to?" I considered this. Most people would be curious. I'm not most people. He removed his glasses, cleaning them with the edge of his sweater. "And I respect privacy. When you want to talk about it, you will." That was Julian, giving me space when everyone else in my life had always demanded explanations. On campus, I maintained my distance from Ethan, Claire, and Professor Langdon. My initial acts of revenge had exposed their deceptions, but the satisfaction had faded quickly. The investigation into Ethan's financial aid fraud was ongoing. Claire's plagiarism had been flagged, putting her upcoming exhibition in jeopardy. Professor Langdon walked the halls with haunted eyes, waiting for the Academic Integrity Committee to complete their review. Strangely, as my connection with Julian deepened, my appetite for their destruction waned. The anger still simmered, but it no longer consumed me. One afternoon as we walked along the river path, I confessed this to Julian. "I wanted to destroy them for what they did," I said, watching fallen leaves float downstream. "For lying to me for so long." Julian remained silent, listening. "But now, I don't know. It doesn't fix anything." I kicked at a pine cone on the path. "It doesn't change what happened." "Revenge rarely provides the closure we hope for," Julian finally said. "It's like taking poison and expecting the other person to die." "So what am I supposed to do? Forgive them?" The very idea made my stomach clench. "No, forgiveness is your choice, not your obligation." Julian stopped walking, turning to face me. "But moving forward doesn't require forgetting or forgiving. It just means not letting them determine your path anymore." I studied his face, the intensity in his dark eyes, wondering what experiences had given him such wisdom. I got my answer a week later. We were at his apartment during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows. I was painting. Julian had cleared a corner of his living room for me, setting up a small easel by the window where the natural light was best on clear days. "My sister would have liked you," he said suddenly from where he sat reading on the couch. I lowered my brush, surprised by the non sequitur. "Your sister?" "May." His voice softened around the name. "She died 5 years ago. Car accident." The pain in his voice was unmistakable. I set down my palette and moved to sit beside him. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. We were hiking in the mountains. I slipped on a trail and fell about 30 feet down a ravine. Julian spoke with a detachment that couldn't quite mask the emotion underneath. "May climbed down to help me. She got me to the car somehow, started driving to the hospital, but she was distracted, worried about me. She missed a turn on the mountain road." I took his hand, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers. "The car went over the guardrail. I survived, she didn't." He drew a deep breath. "That's why I volunteer at the hospital. She wanted to be a doctor. It's my way of honoring her." In that moment, I understood Julian's patience with my trauma. He carried his own. His steady presence in my chaos wasn't just kindness, it was recognition. "Is that why you approached me that first day in physical therapy?" I asked. "Because of what happened to her?" Julian paused before answering. "Partly. I recognized something in you, a familiar kind of pain." The storm outside matched the turmoil I saw in his eyes. For once, I wished I could hear his thoughts, to understand the parts he wasn't saying aloud. On particularly bad days, when the mental voices became overwhelming, Julian knew exactly what to do. He'd guide me to his apartment, put on classical music at just the right volume, and sit in companionable silence until the worst passed. During one such episode, after a grueling art critique session where 20 students' simultaneous thoughts had left me nauseated and disoriented, Julian held my hand as I sat with my eyes closed on his couch. "Focus on my voice," he said calmly. "Just my voice." "There are so many of them," I whispered, "all talking at once." "I know." His thumb traced circles on my palm. "Try to visualize them as radio stations. You can turn the dial, decrease the volume." I frowned, eyes still closed. "How would you know?" There was a beat of silence. "It's a common meditation technique for overwhelming thoughts." Something in his tone made me open my eyes, but his expression revealed nothing. Despite these moments of connection, questions about Julian lingered. Why couldn't I hear his thoughts? Why did he seem so unsurprised by my strange behavior? How did he always know exactly what I needed? The answers came on a chilly November evening. Julian had a late meeting with his dissertation advisor, so I was alone in his apartment, working on a painting. When my stomach growled, I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I went to the kitchen to make a sandwich. The bread was in the cabinet above the refrigerator. Too short to reach it comfortably, I dragged a chair over and climbed up. As I stretched for the bread, my hand knocked against a heavy medical textbook stashed on top of the cabinet. It fell with a loud thump, pages splaying open on the linoleum floor. When I hopped down to retrieve it, the title caught my eye. Consciousness Beyond Death, Medical Perspectives on Near-Death Phenomena. I picked it up, noticing several bookmarks protruding from the edges. The book naturally fell open to a heavily annotated chapter, Post-Traumatic Telepathic Phenomena Following Clinical Death. My heart began to race as I read the highlighted passages. The author discussed rare cases where patients who had experienced clinical death reported sudden onset of telepathic abilities, the capacity to perceive others' thoughts, particularly strong emotional states or deliberate projections. In the margins, Julian had written extensive notes. Subject B exhibited sensitivity to emotional states 4 days post-resuscitation. Subject C reported overwhelming input in crowded environments, consistent with unfiltered reception. Blocking techniques successful in 70% of trials. I flipped through more pages, finding descriptions of symptoms eerily similar to my own experiences: heightened sensory perception, inability to filter mental noise, emotional exhaustion. With trembling hands, I returned to the kitchen, the sandwich forgotten. That's when I noticed a folder on Julian's desk that hadn't been there before. The flap was slightly open, revealing newspaper clippings. I shouldn't look, I told myself, but the need to understand outweighed my scruples. The top clipping was from the Metropolitan Times, dated the day after my accident. Local art student critical after collision at Oakwood intersection. There was a grainy photo of my crumpled car, the intersection cordoned off with police tape. In the margin, in Julian's precise handwriting, were the words that sent a chill through me. It happened again. Below that clipping were others, articles about near-death experiences, a scientific study on consciousness, and most disturbingly, a list of names with dates beside them. My name was at the bottom, with my accident date. The sound of a key in the lock made me shove everything back into the folder and retreat to the living room, my mind reeling. Julian entered, unwinding his scarf from his neck. "Sorry I'm late," he said, hanging up his coat. "Professor Whitaker had a lot of feedback on my—" He stopped, studying my face. "What's wrong?" I pointed to the medical book I'd left on the coffee table. "Did you know this would happen to me?" Julian's expression shifted, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Sienna? What am I to you, an experiment? Another subject for your research?" My voice rose as the betrayal cut deeper. "Is that why you sought me out in the hospital? Why you've been so understanding about everything?" "It's not that simple," Julian said, taking a step toward me. I backed away. "Were you there? At my accident?" He hesitated too long before answering. "Sienna, please let me explain." "That's a yes, then." The room seemed to tilt around me. "All this time? You've known exactly what was happening to me, and you said nothing. You watched me struggle, think I was going crazy. I was trying to help you adjust gradually," Julian said, his calm facade cracking. "These abilities, they're overwhelming at first. I needed to—" "You needed?" I grabbed my bag, shoving my brushes inside. "What about what I needed, like the truth?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "If you would just listen." "I can't hear anything right now." I pushed past him toward the door. "I need to think. Alone." "Sienna, please," Julian called after me, but I was already hurrying down the stairs. The night air hit me like a physical blow as I emerged onto the street, tears blurring my vision. I walked blindly, not caring where I ended up, my mind churning with questions. How much did Julian know? Why had he kept it from me? Was everything between us just part of his research? I eventually found my way back to my apartment, collapsing onto my bed fully clothed. Sleep came fitfully, dragging me into dreams filled with screeching tires and splintering glass. In my dream, I was back at Oakwood intersection, trapped in my car as rain pounded the crumpled hood. Pain radiated through my body. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. My vision dimmed, darkness creeping in from the edges. Then a face appeared at the shattered window. Julian's face, his expression tense with urgency. "Stay with me, Sienna," he said, reaching through the broken glass. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." I felt his hand on mine, warm against my cold skin. "It's happening to her too," he whispered, though not to me, just like it happened to us. The dream shifted, and I was floating above the scene, watching as paramedics arrived as they pulled my broken body from the wreckage. Through it all, Julian stood to the side, his face a mask of concern and something else. Recognition. I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding. The dream had felt more like a memory than a nightmare. Julian had been there, at my accident. He had known what was happening to me from the beginning, and now I had to find out why. Morning light filtered through my blinds as I stared at the ceiling, Julian's face from my dream still vivid in my mind. He had been there at the accident. The realization sat heavily in my chest, demanding answers I couldn't ignore anymore. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 7:15 a.m. Too early to start making calls, but not too early to start searching for the truth. I showered quickly, threw on jeans and a sweater, and grabbed a bagel on my way out. The city bus rumbled beneath me as I headed toward Oakwood intersection. I needed to see it again. The place where I had died for 3 minutes. The place where everything changed. Rush hour traffic had subsided by the time I arrived. Standing on the corner, I observed the ordinary scene. Traffic lights changing, cars pausing and accelerating, pedestrians crossing with barely a glance. Nothing to suggest that someone's life had been irrevocably altered here. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the intersection wash over me. Fragments of memory surfaced. Rain on the windshield, the glare of headlights, the sickening crunch of metal. But now, another image emerged clearly. Julian's face appearing at my shattered window, his expression tense with urgency. "Stay with me, Sienna," he had said just as in my dream. "Help is coming, just stay with me." I opened my eyes, heart racing. It wasn't a dream. It was memory. Julian had been there, watching me die. A businessman hurried past, his mind broadcasting worries about a morning presentation. I stepped back from the curb, seeking distance from his anxiety. Whatever had happened to me here had connected me to Julian in ways I was only beginning to understand. And I needed answers. The county records office was housed in a drab government building downtown. The woman at the information desk had tightly permed gray hair and glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "How can I help you, dear?" she asked, her mind idly reviewing a grocery list. "I need to look up hospital records from about 5 years ago," I said, trying to sound casual, "for a family history project." She directed me to a computer terminal in the corner. "Public records only, mind you. Anything else requires proper authorization." I thanked her and settled at the outdated machine. The database was clunky but functional. I typed in Julian's full name, which I'd seen on his dissertation materials, and set the date range to 5 to 6 years ago. Several minutes of searching yielded what I was looking for: a hospital admission record for Julian Chen at Mercy Hospital, dated exactly 5 years and 3 months ago. The cause listed was traumatic injuries from hiking accident. He had been admitted to the ICU and remained hospitalized for 8 days. The public record didn't contain medical details, but it confirmed what Julian had told me about his hiking accident. What he hadn't mentioned was that he'd been in the ICU. Intensive care suggested his injuries had been life-threatening. Had Julian experienced clinical death too? My next stop was the university library. If Julian's dissertation focused on consciousness after clinical death, there would be records in the academic database. I signed in at a research terminal and began searching. Julian's name brought up several results, including his undergraduate thesis on psychological trauma recovery, but I was most interested in his current doctoral work. The dissertation title appeared on screen: Consciousness Beyond Boundaries, Neurological and Psychological Phenomena Following Clinical Death. The abstract described his research focus: examining reported perceptual changes in individuals who had experienced clinical death, particularly those with unexplained sensory abilities afterward. The methodology mentioned case studies of subjects who had survived near-death experiences with altered consciousness. Subject B, Subject C, the annotations I'd seen in his book. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. Had I simply been Subject D to him? Another case study for his dissertation? I printed the abstract and left the library, needing fresh air to clear my head. Outside, students hurried to classes, their thoughts washing over me in waves of anxiety about assignments and social drama. I pulled my scarf higher around my neck, as if it could somehow block the mental noise. By late afternoon, I'd gathered enough information to confront Julian. I texted him, "Riverside Park, Willow Bench, 5 p.m. No explanation, no pleasantries." His reply came quickly: "I'll be there." Riverside Park stretched along the eastern edge of the city, following the curve of the river. In November, the trees stood mostly bare, their branches stark against the gray sky. The willow bench sat in a quiet section near the water, partially sheltered by a weeping willow that had somehow retained a few yellow leaves. I arrived early, watching the river flow past, dark and swift with recent rain. The park was nearly empty on this cold weekday afternoon, which suited my purposes perfectly, fewer minds to intrude on my already tumultuous thoughts. Exactly at 5, Julian appeared on the path. He wore a black peacoat and his typical rectangular glasses, his expression cautious as he approached. For once I wished I could read his thoughts, to know if he felt genuine remorse or simply calculated how to handle me. He sat beside me, keeping a respectful distance. For several moments neither of us spoke. "You were there," I finally said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "At my accident, you were the first person I saw after the crash." Julian didn't deny it. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. "I was going to. I've been trying to find the right moment." 5 weeks wasn't enough time to find the right moment? My tone was sharper than I'd intended. "It's complicated, Sienna." Julian turned to face me fully. "What happened to you, what's happening to you, isn't something I could just explain over coffee." I pulled out the printed abstract of his dissertation. "You've been studying people like me, people who developed telepathic abilities after clinical death." He glanced at the paper. "Yes." "How many others are there?" "That I've found? 3 in 5 years of searching." Julian's voice softened. "It's incredibly rare, Sienna. The combination of factors required, the specific type of brain activity during resuscitation, the duration of clinical death, the individual's neurological makeup. It's like winning a lottery you never bought a ticket for." "And you?" I met his eyes directly. "Mercy Hospital 5 years ago. You were in the ICU after your hiking accident. Did you experience clinical death too?" Julian looked out at the river. "For 4 minutes and 20 seconds, longer than you. They didn't expect me to recover fully, if at all. And afterward, you could hear thoughts. Yes, it was..." He paused, searching for words. "Overwhelming. Terrifying. I thought I was losing my mind." I recognized the emotion in his voice, the same panic I'd felt upon waking in the hospital. "How did you learn to control it?" I asked. "Trial and error, mostly. Meditation techniques. Creating mental barriers." Julian's gaze returned to me. "That's why you can't hear my thoughts, Sienna. I've learned to block them." The revelation stunned me even though I'd begun to suspect it. "You can control it that completely?" "With practice, yes. And you can too." His expression turned earnest. "That's part of why I wanted to help you. I remember how isolating it was, how overwhelming. No one understood what I was experiencing." A group of joggers passed on the path, their thoughts briefly intruding, musical playlists, dinner plans, relationship worries, before fading as they moved away. "The night of your accident," Julian continued, "I was driving home from the library. I was behind you at Oakwood intersection when that truck ran the red light. I saw the impact, pulled over immediately. I was the first one to reach your car." "And you knew what was happening to me in the hospital," I said, pieces falling into place. "That's why you volunteered that day in physical therapy. You weren't there by coincidence." No, at least he had the decency not to lie. When Dr. Patel mentioned a young woman who'd experienced clinical death for 3 minutes, I was curious. When I saw your reactions to the staff, the way you flinched at seemingly nothing, the confusion when no one had spoken, I recognized the signs. "So I was just research to you?" The question that had been burning inside me finally emerged. "Another subject for your dissertation?" "At first, maybe," Julian admitted, his voice quiet. "But it quickly became more than that, Sienna. I genuinely care about you. I wanted to help you navigate this because I know how devastating it can be without guidance." "By lying to me? By watching me struggle without telling me what was happening, or that you understood exactly what I was going through?" My voice cracked with emotion. "Do you have any idea how alone I felt?" "I do know," Julian said simply. "Better than anyone. That's why I couldn't just approach you with, 'Hello, I also hear thoughts. Let me explain everything.' You needed to trust me first. You needed to know you weren't alone before you could accept what was happening." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said, anger rising. "You had no right to withhold that from me." "You're right." Julian's acceptance of blame was unexpected. I made a mistake. I thought I was protecting you, but I was also protecting myself. Revealing my ability meant revealing my vulnerability. I've spent 5 years hiding what I can do." We sat in silence for several minutes, watching the river flow past. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park. "Show me," I finally said. "What?" "Show me how to control it, right now." Julian studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Close your eyes. Imagine your mind as a room with many doors. Each door leads to another person's thoughts. Right now, all your doors are open, letting everything in." I followed his instructions, visualizing a circular room with countless doors standing open, voices pouring through each one. "Now imagine yourself walking to each door, one by one, and closing it," Julian continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Push it shut. Feel the latch catch. Notice how each closed door reduces the noise." I mentally moved through my imagined space, closing door after door. With each one, the mental cacophony diminished slightly. "You won't be able to close them all at once," Julian said. "It takes practice, but even closing a few can give you relief." I opened my eyes, surprised to find the mental voices had indeed receded somewhat. They weren't gone, but they seemed more distant, less intrusive. "That's just the beginning," Julian said, a hint of pride in his voice. "With practice, you can learn to open only the doors you choose when you choose. You can control your ability rather than letting it control you." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Really?" Julian's expression turned solemn. "Because I know what it's like to receive this unwanted gift. Because for 5 years, I've been searching for others who understand. And because—" He hesitated, then continued, "because despite how we met and my initial motivations, I've grown to care about you deeply, Sienna." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did, but the betrayal still stung too freshly. "I need time," I said, standing up. "I need to think about everything." Julian nodded, not trying to stop me. "I understand. And I need to handle some unfinished business." 2 days later, the university gallery hosted the opening of the fall exhibition. I'd avoided it at first, knowing Ethan, Claire, and Professor Langdon would all be there. But after my conversation with Julian, I realized I needed closure with them as well. I wore a simple black dress with a silver pendant. Nothing flashy, but I'd taken care with my appearance. This wasn't about slinking in unnoticed. It was about facing my past with dignity. The gallery buzzed with conversation and the clink of wine glasses. Students and faculty mingled among the displayed artwork, including pieces from both Claire and me. Her industrial reclamation series, the one suspiciously similar to Maya Lupton's work, had been replaced with an earlier project after my anonymous tip. I spotted Ethan and Claire near the refreshment table, their heads bent together in conversation. They didn't notice me approach until I was standing directly before them. "Sienna!" Claire's surprise was evident both in her voice and her thoughts. "Oh God, she actually came. How awkward." "I didn't expect to see you here," Ethan said, his mental voice betraying his discomfort. "Just be polite for a few minutes and then excuse yourself." "I wanted to congratulate you both," I said calmly. They exchanged confused glances. "For what?" Claire asked cautiously. "For finding each other, for moving in together, for everything you worked so hard to hide from me." Their shock was palpable, both in their expressions and their thoughts. "How does she know about the apartment?" Claire's mental voice was panicked. "I know everything," I continued, maintaining my composure. "About how long it was going on before you ended our engagement, Ethan. About the nights you claimed to be working late. About how you both laughed at my trust and called me clueless." "Sienna, I don't know what you think you heard, but—" Ethan began. "Save it." I held up my hand. "I'm not here for explanations or apologies. I just wanted you to know that I'm aware of the truth, and I wanted to tell you that it doesn't matter anymore." Claire's confusion radiated from her thoughts. "Is this some kind of trick?" "You two betrayed me in the worst possible way," I said. "But nearly dying gave me perspective. I don't need revenge. I don't need to punish you. Your actions define you, not me." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Ethan, the financial aid office is looking into your application discrepancies. You might want to prepare for that conversation." His face paled as I walked away, his panicked thoughts following me across the room. Professor Langdon stood by my painting, an abstract piece I'd completed before the accident, featuring interwoven layers of blue and gold. He looked older somehow, the investigation into his plagiarism having taken its toll. "Professor," I greeted him, Sienna. He seemed surprised but composed himself quickly. Your piece is receiving quite a lot of attention tonight. Thank you. I studied the painting alongside him. You know, I used to think your guidance came from genuine belief in my talent. He stiffened beside me, his thoughts racing. What has she heard? Now I understand it came from a different place, I continued. You saw something in me that threatened you, something you wanted to control rather than nurture. I don't know what you're implying, he said stiffly. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. I turned to face him directly. Your resentment of your student's potential says more about your insecurities than our abilities. His face flushed with anger, but I continued before he could respond. Despite that, you pushed me to develop my technical skills in ways I might not have otherwise, so thank you for that. Even if your motives weren't what I believed. Professor Langdon's mental voice sputtered with indignation and confusion as I walked away. She can't possibly know. No one could know. But I did know. And somehow, acknowledging these betrayals aloud had diminished their power over me. The anger I'd been nurturing for weeks felt lighter, less consuming. Outside the gallery, I paused on the steps, breathing in the cold November air. Stars dotted the clear night sky, visible despite the city lights. I'd confronted my past tonight, but my future remained uncertain, particularly with Julian. His deception complicated everything. The connection I'd felt with him had been real, the peace in his presence, the understanding in his eyes. But had it been built on lies? Had he genuinely cared for me, or had I simply been a fascinating research subject? I pulled out my phone and texted him. I need more time. Please respect that. His response came quickly. I will. Take all the time you need. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and began walking toward home. For the first time since my accident, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The mental voices of passers-by still intruded, but they seemed less overwhelming after practicing Julian's door technique. Whatever happened next, with Julian, with my ability, with my life, would be my choice. No one else's. I'd been given a second chance at life, along with an inexplicable gift that felt more like a curse. Now I needed to decide what to do with both. The streetlights cast long shadows as I walked, the night air crisp against my skin. Unlike before, I wasn't running away. I was moving forward. Toward what? I wasn't yet sure. But for the first time since waking up in the hospital, I felt ready to find out. December's chill had settled over the city, bringing with it a stillness that matched my state of mind. 1 month had passed since the gallery opening, since I'd confronted my betrayers and walked away feeling lighter, but uncertain. 1 month of minimal contact with Julian, just occasional texts checking that I was okay, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. I'd spent that month refining the mental door technique he'd taught me. Each day I practiced closing more doors, controlling which thoughts I allowed in and which I kept at bay. The constant barrage of mental voices had diminished to a manageable hum, not gone, but no longer overwhelming. When my phone lit up with Julian's name that morning, I wasn't surprised. Something had been building in the silence between us, a conversation that needed to happen. Can we meet today? Oakwood intersection, 2 p.m. I stared at the message, Oakwood intersection, where my car had crumpled like paper, where I had died for 3 minutes, where everything had changed. It wasn't a casual choice of location. I'll be there, I replied. The bus ride was quiet, most commuters at work on a Tuesday afternoon. I watched the city pass by through fog-streaked windows, mentally preparing myself for whatever Julian wanted to say. The fact that he'd chosen that specific location told me this wasn't just an apology, it was something more fundamental. I arrived first, standing at the corner where crosswalks met. Traffic moved through the intersection in its usual rhythm, cars accelerating when lights turned green, pedestrians hurrying across with heads bent against the cold. No visible trace remained of what had happened here. No marker indicated that a woman had died and returned changed at this ordinary corner. I sensed Julian before I saw him, a familiar void in the mental landscape. He approached from the opposite corner, hands tucked into the pockets of his black peacoat, his breath visible in the December air. "Thank you for coming," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Why here?" I asked, not ready for pleasantries. Julian glanced at the intersection, then back to me. "Because this is where both our stories intersect. It felt right to have this conversation where it all began." "It began with you lying to me," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling beneath. Yes, he nodded, not defending himself, and I need to apologize properly for that. A gust of wind swept between us, carrying the scent of impending snow. Julian gestured toward a small coffee shop on the corner. Can we talk somewhere warmer? The cafe was nearly empty, just a barista arranging pastries and an elderly man reading a newspaper. We chose a table by the window with a clear view of the intersection. I ordered tea to warm my hands more than for drinking. Once settled, Julian removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I recognized as his way of gathering thoughts. What I did was wrong, he began, replacing his glasses and meeting my eyes directly. I approached you as a research subject when you were vulnerable and confused. I withheld information that would have helped you understand what was happening. I justified it as protection, but part of it was self-preservation. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Why? For 5 years, I've lived with this ability in almost complete isolation, Julian said. When I realized you shared it, I was afraid. Afraid of exposing myself, afraid of your reaction, afraid of losing the connection we were building. So, you let me think I was going crazy instead. No, he shook his head firmly. I tried to help you manage the symptoms while building trust. But I should have been honest from the beginning. I see that now. Through the window, I watched a young couple cross the intersection, leaning into each other against the wind. The normality of the scene contrasted sharply with the strangeness of our conversation. Tell me about the others, I said, returning my gaze to Julian. You said there were 3 besides me. Julian's expression softened with what looked like relief at my engagement. The first was Marcus, a construction worker from Minneapolis. Ceiling collapse, 4 minutes without oxygen. I found him through a medical journal article about his unusual sensory developments post-recovery. He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. Then Eliza, college student from Boston, drowning 3.5 minutes. And David, retired military from San Diego. Heart attack just over 2 minutes. Where are they now? I asked. Marcus wears noise-canceling headphones constantly and lives in a cabin in the woods. Eliza managed partial control but transferred to online classes. David, Julian paused. David couldn't handle it. He's in a psychiatric facility. The voices drove him to a breakdown. The implications hung heavily between us. These outcomes represented my possible futures: isolation, adaptation, or breakdown. So what makes the difference? I asked. Why can some handle it and others can't? Support, understanding, and learning to control it rather than being controlled by it. Julian leaned forward. Sienna, I've spent 5 years developing techniques to manage this ability. I can teach you everything I know. You already started with the door technique. That's just the beginning. His expression turned earnest. I can show you how to focus on specific thoughts, how to create distance, eventually how to build mental barriers like mine. A burst of laughter from the barista interrupted us. She was reacting to something on her phone. Her amusement floated toward me mentally, but it felt muted, manageable. Why are you researching this? I asked. What's your end goal? Julian considered the question. Initially, it was to understand what happened to me. Then, to find others who shared the experience. Now, he hesitated. Now it's about ensuring that people like us don't have to suffer through this alone, that they have resources, techniques, community. And that's why you approached me. At first, yes. Julian's gaze was steady, but it quickly became more than research. The connection I felt with you, it went beyond our shared ability. I studied him, trying to decipher the sincerity in his expression. Without access to his thoughts, I had only his words, his tone, his eyes. I want to try something, Julian said after a moment. If you're willing. What? I want to lower my barriers, let you hear my thoughts, all of them, unfiltered, so you can know exactly where I stand. The suggestion caught me off guard. Julian had maintained his mental privacy strictly since we'd met. Offering to lower his barriers was like offering to stand naked in front of me, complete vulnerability. Are you sure? I asked. Yes. His voice was quiet but firm. You deserve the truth, Sienna, all of it. We left the cafe and walked to a small park near the intersection. The cold had kept most people away, giving us the privacy this moment required. We sat on a bench, our breath clouding the air between us. Ready? Julian asked. I nodded, unsure what to expect. Julian closed his eyes, his face relaxing as if releasing a long-held tension. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a door swinging open, his thoughts flooded into my awareness. She's watching me so carefully. I'm afraid of what she'll find, afraid it will push her away for good. The clarity of his mental voice startled me. Unlike the jumbled, often contradictory thoughts I picked up from others, Julian's mind was organized, deliberate, but beneath that structure flowed powerful currents of emotion. I never meant to hurt her. Started as research but became so much more. The guilt about May is always there. My fault she was driving, my fault she died. Sometimes I think this ability is my punishment. But with Sienna, for the first time, it feels like it could be a connection instead of a burden. Images flickered through his mind. Julian visiting Marcus in his isolated cabin, teaching Eliza meditation techniques in a Boston park, sitting vigil beside David's hospital bed. Each encounter weighted with responsibility and a deep sense of kinship. Then I saw myself through his eyes, confused in the hospital, determined in his apartment, broken yet resilient at every turn. The growing admiration he felt, the surprise at how quickly research interest had transformed into genuine care, then into something deeper. I love her. Not because we share this ability, but because of who she is despite it. Her strength, her compassion even toward those who betrayed her. I'm terrified of losing her now that she knows the truth. The raw honesty of his thoughts brought tears to my eyes. There was no deception here, no hidden agenda, just vulnerability and truth. "Julian," I whispered, reaching for his hand. His eyes opened, uncertainty clouding them. "Now you know. Thank you," I squeezed his hand, "for trusting me with this." "I should have trusted you from the beginning," he said. "I won't make that mistake again." We sat in silence for several minutes, his thoughts gradually fading as he rebuilt his barriers. The mental quiet that followed felt significant, not an absence, but a choice, a demonstration of the control he promised to teach me. "I have a choice to make," I finally said, watching a cardinal flit between bare branches nearby. "I can retreat into isolation like Marcus, try to adapt like Eliza, break like David, or I can embrace connection, despite the risks." Julian waited, giving me space to reach my own conclusion. "I choose connection," I said, meeting his eyes. "I want to learn from you, work with you, but I need complete honesty from now on. No more withheld information, no matter how you think it might affect me." "I promise," Julian said, relief evident in his voice. "Complete transparency." The cardinal took flight, a flash of red against the gray winter sky. Something about its movement reminded me of my own capacity for change, for adaptation. "So," I asked, "when do we start?" The following weeks blurred together in a series of lessons, practices, and gradual reconnections. Julian and I met daily, usually at his apartment where the quiet offered better conditions for concentration. He taught me to focus on specific thoughts in a crowd, to create mental distance from unwanted intrusions, to build temporary barriers that grew stronger with practice. "Imagine the thought as a radio signal," Julian instructed one afternoon as we sat cross-legged on his living room floor. "You can tune the dial, adjust the volume, even change the station completely." I focused on the barista in the cafe downstairs, tuning into her thoughts about inventory orders before deliberately shifting away to the customer discussing dinner plans. The ability to choose which mental voice to hear gave me a sense of control I hadn't experienced since before the accident. "Good," Julian said, observing my expression. "Now try blocking them all." This was harder. Creating a barrier that silenced every voice required intense concentration. I managed it for only seconds at first, then minutes, as the weeks progressed. Julian was a patient teacher, never pushing beyond what I could handle but never letting me settle for less than my capability. During this time, our relationship evolved. The professional distance between teacher and student gradually dissolved into something more personal. Julian no longer hid behind his calm facade, allowing me glimpses of his thoughts even when teaching. I came to understand his guilt about his sister's death, his fear of losing connection with others, the isolation he'd experienced before finding me. By February, we'd fallen into an easy rhythm of work and companionship. I'd returned to my art classes, now able to manage the mental noise of a full studio. Professor Langdon had been placed on academic probation for his plagiarism, but continued teaching. His thoughts toward me had shifted from resentment to a wary respect. One evening, as we walked along the frozen riverbank, Julian broached a subject we'd been circling for weeks. "My lease is up next month," he said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "I've been looking at a 2-bedroom on Willow Street. It's quiet, top floor, good light for your painting." I stopped walking, turning to face him. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" "Yes." His directness was refreshing. "Only if you want to, of course." I thought about my current apartment, how lonely it felt after spending days with Julian, how the mental noise in the thin-walled building sometimes still overwhelmed me despite my improving control. "Willow Street sounds nice," I said, unable to suppress a smile. Julian's face lit up in a way I'd rarely seen. He pulled me close, his joy radiating without need for telepathy. We moved into the Willow Street apartment in March. The space was larger than either of our previous homes, with high ceilings and windows that flooded the rooms with morning light. Julian converted the second bedroom into a shared office, installing bookshelves for his research materials and setting up an easel by the east window for my painting. My art had evolved since the accident. The ability to sense others' emotions translated into work that resonated on a deeper level. Colors seemed more significant, compositions more deliberate. My professor noted the change in my midterm review. "There's a maturity to your recent pieces," she said, studying my portfolio. "An emotional intelligence that was emerging before but has fully developed now." I couldn't explain that I literally felt others' emotions, but I accepted the praise with quiet gratitude. Julian had helped me see my ability as potentially valuable rather than purely burdensome. As spring approached, I made decisions about the broken relationships in my life. I reached out to Ethan and Claire, not for reconciliation, but for closure. We met at a neutral cafe, the conversation awkward but necessary. "I'm not here to rehash the past," I told them, maintaining my mental barriers to avoid their unfiltered thoughts. "But I wanted you to know I've moved forward. I hope you have too." Claire's relief was visible. "We have. And Sienna, I'm truly sorry for how we hurt you." Ethan nodded, looking more genuine than I'd ever sensed from him. "The financial aid investigation was a wake-up call. I'm trying to be more accountable now." I left that meeting feeling unburdened. I didn't need their friendship anymore, but I no longer needed their punishment either. With Professor Langdon, the path forward was more complicated. His academic dishonesty had damaged his reputation, but his technical knowledge remained valuable. When he approached me about collaborating on a community art initiative, I considered it carefully. "I've made mistakes," he admitted during our discussion. "Serious ones. But this project could benefit local schools that have lost arts funding." I agreed to work with him under specific conditions: transparency in all aspects, shared credit for ideas, and student involvement at every stage. Our professional relationship became more balanced, built on mutual respect rather than his previous paternalism and my former admiration. By June, my control had improved dramatically. I could go days without hearing unwanted thoughts, creating barriers that held even in crowded spaces. When I did choose to listen, I did so selectively and with greater understanding of the context. "You're progressing faster than anyone I've worked with," Julian remarked one evening as we prepared dinner in our kitchen, "even faster than I did." "I have a better teacher," I replied, bumping his hip with mine as I reached for plates. He caught my hand, pulling me closer. "You have natural ability, and determination. And motivation." I leaned into him. "The possibility of a normal life is pretty compelling." Julian's expression turned thoughtful. "Do you ever think about using your ability intentionally, beyond just controlling it?" I considered the question while setting the table. "Sometimes. I've used it to understand my subjects better when painting portraits, to sense what they want to express but can't articulate." "That's beautiful," Julian said, using it to connect rather than to withdraw. The summer passed in comfortable routine. Julian continued his research, occasionally traveling to check on Marcus and Eliza. I focused on my senior exhibition, preparing a series that subtly explored the boundaries between individual minds. We didn't hide our relationship, though we were selective about who knew about our shared ability, just Marcus and Eliza, who understood from experience. In late September, almost a year after my accident, Julian asked me to meet him on the university rooftop garden after my evening class. The space was beautiful at sunset, with container plants and climbing vines creating a green oasis above the campus. Julian waited beside the eastern railing, the setting sun casting golden light across his face. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, adjusting his glasses repeatedly as I approached. "What's this about?" I asked, taking in the bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket near the bench. "I wanted to mark the occasion," he said. "It's been almost a year since everything changed for you. For us." I smiled, touching his arm lightly. "An anniversary of sorts." "Yes." He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "This year has been transformative in ways I never expected." The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the colors intensifying as the sun dipped lower toward the horizon. Julian guided me to the bench, pouring champagne into 2 flutes with slightly unsteady hands. "Sienna, before I met you, I'd resigned myself to a life of careful distance. My ability seemed like a barrier between me and genuine connection." He handed me a glass. "Then you crashed into my life, literally, and everything changed." I laughed softly. Not the most graceful entrance, but a memorable one. His expression grew serious. "You showed me that this ability doesn't have to isolate us. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That trust is a choice worth making." As the last direct rays of sunlight stretched across the rooftop, Julian set down his glass and reached into his pocket. My breath caught as he revealed a small velvet box. "I want to keep choosing trust with you," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple ring with a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Every day, for as long as you'll have me." Tears blurred my vision as he knelt before me. "Sienna Clark, will you marry me?" In that moment, I didn't need telepathy to know his heart. It was written in his eyes, in the slight tremor of his hands, in the love that had built slowly and steadily between us over the past year. "Yes," I whispered, reaching for him. "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized this marked the final chapter of my old life story. The woman who had died for 3 minutes at Oakwood intersection had been reborn into someone stronger, more perceptive, more deliberate in her connections. What followed would be an entirely new beginning built on honesty, vulnerability, and chosen trust. Julian pulled me close, his thoughts briefly touching mine as he lowered his barriers. Just happiness, pure and uncomplicated. We stood together as the last light faded from the sky, not needing words or even thoughts to understand what we had found in each other. Not just 2 people with an unusual ability, but 2 people who had chosen connection despite knowing exactly how fragile and precious it was.